Alva Erskine Smith entered New York society with a problem that glitter could not hide. She had married into one of the richest families in America, yet the circles that mattered most still saw her as an outsider. The Vanderbilts possessed railroads, steamships, and fortunes measured in millions, but not the one currency old New York valued above all else: legitimacy. Their money was too new, their manners too loud, their patriarch too famously rough. The usual story describes Alva Vanderbilt as a ruthless social climber who staged an outrageous costume ball and forced her way into the 400. That version is entertaining, but it misses the mechanism. It overlooks how precisely she read a system built by other women, how carefully she exploited its rules, and how her choices shaped not only her own life but her daughter's fate and later the direction of the American suffrage movement. Behind the famous ball lay a deliberate strategy. Alva understood that New York's social order functioned like a private stock exchange governed by a small group of matrons. Caroline Astor and her allies controlled invitations, calling lists, and opera boxes the way bankers controlled seats on financial exchanges. Entry was limited, reputations were traded, daughters were positioned like high-value assets. A single woman at the center could ruin another family's prospects simply by not writing a name on a card. Alva did not try to destroy that system. She learned how it worked, then turned its own mechanics against it. She commissioned sophisticated architecture. A single missing invitation to one young woman triggered a chain of obligation. This elaborate sequence ultimately ended with the queen of society, Caroline Astor, being forced to ring Alva's doorbell. This fierce determination was rooted in an earlier fall from grace. Alva had grown up within the wealthy Southern planter class. That world collapsed following the Civil War and her father's business failures. The memory of diminished status never left her. Her youth was spent surrounded by rituals of rigid status, servants, formal calls, and high expectations for daughters. The war stripped this certainty away. Her father's financial decline sharply reduced the family's marriage prospects. The daughters still carried breeding and polish, but the financial security required for an acceptable match was now unreliable. In this suddenly precarious space, marriage became less a romantic ideal and more a structural necessity. A well-born daughter from a declining household was expected to convert her social capital into renewed financial security. The older pattern of local alliances faded. The new world required connection to industrial fortunes in the north and titles across the Atlantic. Alva spent extensive time in New York and Europe. She absorbed languages and sophisticated manners. Crucially, she gained a detailed understanding of how elite social systems operated. Drawing rooms taught hierarchy more effectively than books. Opera boxes and resort gossip demonstrated how women controlled the tacit flow of social approval. Although her own immediate prospects were narrowed, she became an expert at reading these unspoken social codes. When she married William Kissam Vanderbilt in 1875, her decision was neither impulsive nor naive. William's grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt, had built the family fortune through aggressively competing railroads. Society saw him as shrewd but crude. His descendants inherited immense wealth, but also a reputation for vulgar display. Old families accepted Vanderbilt checks, but would not easily accept Vanderbilt daughters as equals. Alva recognized a mutual opportunity. She brought a lineage that, though financially damaged, carried an aura of Southern respectability and European polish. She also brought the deep social instincts of someone who had once watched status collapse. She had no intention of repeating that experience. In exchange, she gained access to resources that made grand architectural statements and social spectacle possible. Their union was a calculated fusion of two kinds of power: On one side stood pedigree without money, on the other stood money without pedigree. Alva defined her role as merging the two into a presence that could not be ignored. The laboratory for this fusion was architecture. The Fifth Avenue Petit Château was commissioned in a French Renaissance style. It translated railroad wealth into a language the old elite understood: stone, symmetry, and European references. Every detail was a statement that Vanderbilt money could clothe itself in the aesthetic grammar of continental aristocracies. Inside, the layout reinforced hierarchy. The vast ballroom could easily host several hundred people. Hidden servant corridors preserved the illusion of effortless hospitality. Reception rooms carefully channeled guests to positions where the mistress could observe and classify. This was architectural sociology, designed to make Alva a reigning hostess. To step through those doors was to enter a reality built entirely on her terms. Yet even a palace on Fifth Avenue could not by itself compel Caroline Astor's recognition. Mrs. Astor controlled the upper tier of New York society with precise bureaucratic attention. Her famous 400 represented the specific number of people who could fit comfortably into her ballroom. This physical limit created a highly regulated social list with major implications for young women. Names on the list matched with one another. Balls and dinners repeatedly brought certain young men and women together, allowing parents to evaluate and negotiate alliances. Daughters whose names were not on the list found themselves severely marginalized in the marriage market. Alva understood that her husband William's immense fortune could not force inclusion alone. For the sake of their children, especially their daughters, she needed Mrs. Astor to publicly acknowledge the Vanderbilts as equals. The tool she chose for this operation was the 1883 costume ball. The ball has become a legend of diamonds and extravagance. Costumes and jewels created a spectacle that cost the equivalent of many millions today. But beyond the feathers and silk lay meticulous social engineering. Alva built the entire event backward from one specific, necessary outcome: Caroline Astor walking through her door. Social convention dictated that invitations flowed along established lines of recognition. A hostess could not invite a young woman whose mother had never paid a call. A mother could not request an invitation without first acknowledging the hostess's status with a formal visit. Every gesture affirmed this female hierarchy. Mrs. Astor's daughter, Carrie, belonged to the most desirable group of young women in the city. She was popular, attractive, and should have been an automatic guest at any significant social event. Alva, however, deliberately left Carrie's name off the list. The omission created an intense social problem for Mrs. Astor. If Carrie attended, the Astors would signal that the Vanderbilts were acceptable company. If she did not attend, and the ball succeeded anyway, it would demonstrate that a crucial event could occur without Astor participation. In either case, the Astors would lose a measure of control over the social calendar. Mrs. Astor's friends and younger relatives pressed her. They recognized the scale of the event and understood it would be a social watershed. Compelled by the logic of the very system she had helped create, Caroline Astor paid a formal call on Alva Vanderbilt. Only after this visit did invitations reach Mrs. Astor and Carrie. Their presence at the ball was widely read as certification. The Queen of Society had come to the upstart's chateau, not to snub, but to participate. In one carefully managed sequence: omission, pressure, visit, invitation, attendance, Alva had used the internal rules of female gatekeeping to force public acknowledgement of her family's status. The ball was more than a display of wealth. Its guest list mapped an emerging network of power where railroad, banking, and old mercantile fortunes intertwined. Astors, Vanderbilts, and others filled the rooms. The interactions knit together strands that would later reappear in philanthropic boards, business alliances, and marriage contracts. Alva, the hostess, oversaw this complex social choreography. Winning that social recognition set the stage for a second, more personal project, the future of her daughter, Consuelo. Here, the mechanics of the marriage market became dramatically clearer. Once the Vanderbilt name was integrated into the inner circle, it could be spent in a different way across the Atlantic. By the 1890s, a strong pattern had emerged that linked immense American fortunes with fading European titles. British aristocracy, rich in heritage but often cash poor, became increasingly open to unions with American heiresses. The dowries could stabilize estates, renovate ancestral homes, and pay off accumulated debts. American parents viewed this exchange as mutually beneficial. Their daughters received titles and ancient houses. The families gained names that could not be bought directly with money. Alva's strategy for Consuelo followed this pattern with unusual intensity. She selected Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, as her target. Blenheim Palace, his ancestral home, was magnificent but financially strained. The match would connect Vanderbilt railroad wealth to a lineage tracing back to the famous victory at the Battle of Blenheim. In social terms, this promised a form of permanent legitimacy. The process of securing this marriage reveals mother-daughter dynamics in a stark form. Consuelo loved another man and was deeply unhappy at the prospect of marrying the Duke. Alva, however, believed the union was absolutely essential. She had spent years moving the Vanderbilts into social acceptance. Now she saw the chance to anchor their American fortunes within the highest ranks of the European aristocracy. Preparation for the marriage resembled training for a highly specialized public role. Alva carefully instructed her daughter on how to sit, dress, and converse for her future position. The Duchess-to-be needed to handle country house rituals and the exacting standards of Marlborough relatives. These lessons functioned as both maternal guidance and the enforcement of a strategic dynastic plan. Consuelo's resistance did not disappear. She reportedly wept and pleaded against the marriage. Alva responded with a combination of guilt, threats, and emotional pressure. She later admitted coercing her daughter, even claiming to have feigned illness to force compliance. The mother who had once battled Caroline Astor now employed similar pressure tactics inside her own household. The marriage contract reflected the monumental scale of the exchange. The dowry, translated into current values, reached into the tens of millions. This money helped restore Blenheim Palace, funded major improvements, and stabilized the dukedom. In return, Consuelo became Duchess of Marlborough, forever linking Vanderbilt blood to one of Britain's grandest titles. The union, however, did not bring lasting happiness. Emotional distance, differing expectations, and structural strains eroded the marriage. It eventually ended in separation and then divorce, a highly unusual step in that society. Consuelo later built a separate life, engaging in philanthropy, finding fulfillment outside the rigid role her mother had scripted. The arc from the ball to Blenheim reveals clear patterns. On one level, it demonstrates how American industrial fortunes use spectacle and strategic marriage to insert themselves into old, aristocratic networks. The mechanism was immense dowries exchanged for ancient names. Behind that lay a network of women making, enforcing, and sometimes regretting these decisions. Caroline Astor's power rested on her mastery of social infrastructure. Alva Vanderbilt's power rested on her ability to build rival infrastructure, grand houses and competing centres of hospitality, and force a connection. Both women ultimately shaped the fates of daughters whose personal preferences were frequently secondary to dynastic calculations. Within these families, sister dynamics and daughter hierarchies often emerged. One sister might receive a huge dowry and marry a titled foreigner. Another might receive a modest amount and marry a respectable but less grand man. A third, who insisted on marrying for love, might be cut off entirely. The original distribution of resources captured parental hopes, not ultimate destiny, which often involved ironic reversals. In the Vanderbilt Marlborough story, a different inversion appears. Alva successfully achieved her grandest social aims. Her family was accepted, and her daughter became a duchess. Yet it was Alva, not Consuelo, who later profoundly redefined her life through a new cause. After divorcing William K. Vanderbilt, Alva married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont. She then moved gradually toward political activism, supporting militant suffrage campaigns. She used Marble House in Newport as a stage for organizing and lectures. The architectural sophistication she once used for lavish costume balls acquired a new public purpose. Drawing rooms that had witnessed intricate elite courtship now heard speeches about women's political rights. The woman who had once drilled her daughter in how to please a duke now financed campaigns to expand the legal power of women outside her own household. This profound shift did not erase her earlier choices. It added complexity to her story. The same strategic mind that calculated the impact of the 1883 ball now calculated the cost and impact of banners, processions, and legal challenges. Alva deployed her fortune into a new network: activists, organisers, and political allies. Instead of coaxing Caroline Astor to cross a threshold, she now tried to persuade public opinion and legislators to cross a political barrier. Seen across decades, Alva's life illustrates how women in dynastic systems can move from private gatekeeping to public advocacy. First, she used architecture and marriage to secure a vulnerable family's position. Then she used the resulting wealth and stability to support a movement that aimed to give women broader tools than the ones she had wielded as a social strategist. The great houses remain as stone witnesses to this history. Their facades record the moment when raw railroad wealth demanded social recognition. Their interiors remember the nights when daughters in satin stood under chandeliers while mothers watched, calculated, and hoped. The architectural sophistication also recalls the hidden female world of the service corridors, where dozens of servants worked invisibly to maintain the illusion of effortless hospitality. Other dynasties followed similar arcs. Heiresses who once crossed the Atlantic as dollar princesses later funded hospitals, schools, and art institutions. Mothers who had once strategized over dance cards ended their lives endowing colleges or museums. The same fortunes that enforced rigid social scripts eventually underwrote spaces where new scripts could be written. Alva Vanderbilt stands at the center of this pattern, a woman whose contradictions do not cancel each other, but instead illuminate the pressures of her time. She was both the hand that pushed her daughter toward a gilded cage and the hand that signed checks to pry open the doors of political participation. The tension between those roles is uncomfortable. It is also historically honest. Understanding her in full reveals how female power functioned inside old money systems, through architecture and invitations, through marriage and money, and finally through law and protest. It shows how a woman could be both agent and captive, both enforcer and reformer. It suggests that personal evolution, even late in life, can alter the meaning of earlier acts without erasing their consequences. In that sense, the complex truth about Alva Vanderbilt is not an anomaly. It is a concentrated example of the way dynastic women navigated change across generations. Their choices, however flawed, shape not only the fates of their daughters, but also the institutional landscape inherited by those who came after.